All right. Please welcome Sidney Hopson to join us for this conversation. You are a percussionist and teacher. And what is amazed to me is that you are also doing a lot of work in researching about cultural policies, and you are also writing a book, right? So let's welcome Sidney.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here, pleasure to be a part of the conversation. Really looking forward to diving into some stuff with you.
Yeah, I want to just maybe you can make a little bit of an introduction, because I remember back in the days you also advocate for artists, foreign artists, and help them through the immigration process, etc. And I was one of them. I was a foreign student for many years, and I went through this years of trying to apply for a status and then permanent residency. Finally, I became a citizen in 2018. So it was quite a process, and I'm really amazed that you are also aware of this and want to do something to help.
If there's any phrase I think I've said the most throughout the last decade, is it's all connected, right? Mm-hmm. And so to be an advocate for the arts or an advocate for arts organizations, I think you really have to take a holistic look at it. You have to look at everybody who's affected by it. You have to see the potential of what we can achieve when everyone receives the kind of legislative, social, organizational support available. And while my initial foray into arts policy was actually trying to help a friend get an artist visa, and so through that process, learning about the visa process and sort of the foreign policy aspects of the arts, essentially you can't unsee things that you learn, right? And so the same way that I learned a lot of potential that existed within the arts industries, I saw a lot of holes and a lot of disconnects between the legislature and the creatives on the ground doing the work we do. Mm-hmm. And so essentially I set out to try to find a way to close those gaps, which meant being able to both build programs, design legislation, and write to try to make the case for the much larger and holistic impacts we could accomplish if we just honed in on these sort of deficiencies in our policy mechanisms.
Mm-hmm. I know that the past couple of years you have been traveling to Washington, D.C. and meeting with lobbyists, congressmen, and so forth, and try to get through the ideas of some of your ideas about cultural policy. Now, before we go into that, I particularly want to do this with you because we just had this wonderful policy initiative from the LA County. I know they used to have the LA County Commission for the Arts, and then now it's called the Department of Arts and Culture. And they have published a county-wide cultural policy. The context, of course, Los Angeles County, which is the largest county in the United States with 10 million people and plus, with 88 cities. So I want to just I'll ask the first question is, what is cultural policy? I guess you touched a little bit of that early on.
Yeah, well, it's a good question because cultural policy is a term that's been sort of thrown around a lot in recent years, but frankly, it's still in the process of being defined, okay? So depending on who you ask, cultural policy is policy pertaining to the arts specifically. That's, grant programs or legislation that governs organizations like agencies like the National Endowment for the Arts or even the Department of Cultural Affairs. The broader definition, which is one that I tend to identify with, is a policy that not only encompasses arts, but policies that ultimately affect both the longevity and the prosperity and the equity of cultures within the larger national context. So for example, police reform is as much of a cultural policy to me as is an arts grant. And that is very much due to the fact that both can affect the ability of the culture to thrive or hinder the ability for a culture to thrive. And to be honest, again, over the last decade, the term has, I would say, changed a bit and been used a little differently in political spheres, every year to every other year. So it is still sort of finding its sea legs. The county has done a good job in defining it and just the definition that they use in the policy that they've published. I think it could go a little further personally, but I think it's still a really positive step forward.
Compared to what is being discussed in the national level, what do you think? How is Los Angeles doing?
Well, relatively, they're doing very well, and by relatively, I mean it is a very progressive stance that they've taken in the larger context of even other major metropolitan cities. The challenge is, if you look at the roots of arts policy, it was designed to be very socially passive, right? The very first arts organizations in the country, going back to 1910 in DC, the Committee on Fine Arts, was essentially a decorating committee, right? This was the committee whose sole job was to curate paintings and murals for government buildings in the city. So arts policy at the time was merely decor. That was its extent. So as you know, the Department of Cultural Affairs, as we know it now, officially was launched in 1925, right? Which is still 40 years ahead of the National Endowment for the Arts. And so that organization was essentially focused more on the community at large and ultimately curating what it felt was creative spaces for the sort of diverse populace. But that was also in light of the fact that, you know, LA was not only highly, highly segregated, you had many cultures, especially as more blacks moved from, during the Great Migration, continued on into the city.
Because we are all learning something today. I think we're
okay.
like having a lesson with Sidney Hopson. You know, that's a very good opportunity for me to educate myself as well. Because as a band leader, people keep asking me how do I put this band together and everything. Of course, it's a lot of love, and then every time I'm trying to do something, and it could get very expensive, and I'm trying to fundraise, on my own with my fan base and so forth. And I remember one great example. Crystal, who just passed away, always brag about his ability of fundraising, because he always say, well, we fundraise everything. All the projects, I pay for it. We raised $3 million. Everybody's getting paid. And you see the interview when Jean-Claude was still alive, it's just hilarious. Oh, wow, they have all this money. And wrapping the Reichstag in Berlin, what, LA is really advanced because this is the first one in the nation for a county to put this together. There are some ideas that I've never thought of. For example, the decentralized communities like suburbia, because to give access to not only just equity, of course, the equity being in underserved communities and marginalized communities, for example, but also geographically. They look at it geographically as well. So I felt that this is multidimensional.
Yeah, absolutely. The challenge is this. Whether you're looking at the county level or the federal level, access has always been a double-edged sword of a topic, because on one hand, access is critical, especially when you look at how much of the country lives in, rural areas with, sparse to non-existent modes of public transit. The very process of getting communities who are cut off from mainstream content to be able to experience it is critical. And it's not only critical from an industrial sense, it's critical from a national sense. The idea of being able to expose more people to more types of cultural content is just critical, for us as a nation. The challenge is this. There has been disproportionately and exponentially more focus on access than equity, and what that's resulted in is a lack of equity in the content that is accessible. And so the challenge becomes, if we focus only on how to get more people to the same place and not focus on, equally on the sort of content and the policies of the organizations that we see presented, you end up often creating sort of a cultural monopoly amongst presenters. And so what often happens is, and this is obviously a conversation that's spreading a lot throughout the orchestral world right now, is that as long as it takes sort of these mass movements to push any kind of, racial, social, gender equity in the industry, we can talk about accessibility all day, every day. It doesn't change the fact that we're still only elevating and ultimately serving to legitimize one primary culture through the art form. Mm-hmm. And so the question then must be asked, are we gaining culturally from this accessibility if we're still only reinforcing the same old dogmatic norms? Mm-hmm. And that's the question that unfortunately is too often not addressed by cultural policy. Because policy, whether it's been because of the sort of volatile nature, the volatile relationship that exists between the cultural sector and legislators, this feeling that if we push a little too hard or say a little too much, the budget's going to get cut, or just in the case of actual overt biases where whether it's been arts leaders or legislators or agency directors who just feel like, look, the art that matters is Western classical art. It's Western art. We'll put together a few legacy grants and cultural grants for, Black, brown, and everybody in between. But the ultimate focus of our budget, the center of our gravity, is going to be on these sort of large-scale Eurocentric institutions. And so to understand our policy, you really do have to look at it through the lens of just, legitimacy and power and how those ideas have always played out across the cultural sector.
This is probably the tough question to ask. Now, there are mentions, of course, we want to define cultural policy not only just about fine arts, the traditional forms of art and performing arts, but also, widening it so that there is more community involvement and engagement. And some people may say, well, are you taking resources away from the traditional forms of arts? What is your take?
Oh, not in the slightest. I would just say we're adding funds. Let me give you an example. So in 2014 through 2015, I spent time writing an omnibus cultural policy bill that prior to the 2016 election was making some pretty good headway. And the goal is to get it reintroduced here pretty soon. But one of the titles in that bill, in effect, took congressional funds that were earmarked under the umbrella of crime prevention, many of which were grants that were distributed via the Department of Justice to various states, and essentially took programs that were, again, labeled as crime prevention and community-based crime prevention, and made them competitively accessible to arts and cultural institutions that had demonstrated an ability over their period of a year, 2 years plus, to have been able to make a conscious impact in crime prevention, whether that was working with at-risk kids in areas that the numbers gave pretty clear indications that if these were kids that weren't kept off the street, they were already kind of forced into the school-to-prison pipeline, and to say, look, we have the data to verify that not only were, so many of the, and so many continual programs that are funded annually through the DOJ budget and through Congress, while they're labeled crime prevention programs, are not in fact preventative programs. Some of these are grants to finance continued militarization of police, grants to continue the capital campaigns to expand prison systems. These are programs that I often call crime accommodation, not prevention, right? Exactly. And so the idea of saying, look, we're going to recognize that, the impact of these programs can range from cultural awareness to tangible crime prevention to city beautification to job growth to all these, additional sort of areas of progress, to say, look, we recognize that if we can achieve the same impact, in this case, crime prevention, then we should recognize in our crime prevention budgets and our appropriations programs that are designed to do that, that we need to make space for a more creative pool of ideas. And as we're navigating the chapter we're in right now, in the months post George Floyd's death, as police reforms have again boiled to the surface and we're in this national process of pushing for more creative, more community-based, more nonviolent approaches to community development, I think now is a great time to reintroduce it. But
and
health. I'm biased.
and health, right? I mean, it's mental health regarding drug addiction. First of all, you have to keep people healthy and give them resources before they fall into the downward spiral.
No, absolutely. So again, in terms of how the pre-existing traditional programs would be affected, the reality is only a greater pool of funding would become available. With that said, that must also be met by continued pursuits for institutional accountability, equity, diversity. So it's not just enough to say, hey, we're going to pass this law, there's going to be a blank check of sorts for you to sort of take more money, but not actually focus on the needs of the community. It's to say that if all sides meet in the middle, and that a program is willing to demonstrate its ability to not only diversify its content, diversify its staffing, diversify its audiences, but also pay attention and honor this last sort of key element of true community partnership, which is to build these programs without the support or backing of financial institutions that are simultaneously exploiting the sort of racial biases through redlining and other sort of prejudicial financial policies. So if we meet in the middle and we achieve all of these goals, that by every measure in my book is progress. So I think the idea of getting more creative about how we achieve our ends by using pre-existing programs that we already know how they work to achieve solutions that we've already agreed we all are after, just feels like common sense. So I think with a subtle broadening of the cultural policy idea and a clear communication of what it is, why it is, and what we're trying to achieve, I feel like we can hopefully have this issue behind us within a year and just get to the work of getting it all done.
You're also writing, right at the moment?
Yes. There's two big writing projects underway. One is actually a book that I had intended to release several months ago. I realized, well, with current events between COVID and now, of course, the days since George Floyd, I realized
2020.
More things. Exactly. So with that said, I set a hard deadline for myself because I realized I could just keep chasing my tail on this. But the book, my plan is to release it early fall now, so we'll get through the summer. And the second thing is a piece I am currently working on, which is essentially discussing the relationship between mainstream financial institutions, prejudicial housing policies, and arts organizations. And unfortunately, systemically now for a very long time, many of our largest institutions have depended on key sponsorship from organizations that have very intentionally and very targetedly, exploited the very diversity of their communities, while essentially turning around and financing arts organizations for the purpose of rebranding themselves. And it's nothing new. Yeah. But there's unfortunately become an industry trend where particularly diversity programs and initiatives are now being funded by banks more aggressively as a means of rebranding themselves in the wake of redlining settlements. So the idea being that arts organizations, unfortunately, not all, of course, but many and all across the country have become sort of these, middlemen for rebranding corrupt financial practices. And my take is, look, that, as an artist, as an arts administrator, as an arts writer, I hold myself to the same bar here, that you can't call yourself a community partner while you're profiting from the tools of communal oppression. You can't be indifferent to the struggles of Black lives in your financial practices and then post performative statements about your solidarity with the Black community. You don't get to do both. And we need not only a narrative and a conversation, but also a policy that I think enshrines that truth and ultimately puts us on a path towards true equity, both artistically, culturally, and economically. Because at the end of the day, 2 out of 3 isn't enough. So even if we do diversify our programming and our staffing and our content, but we're doing it on the backs of the communities we claim to be supporting and empowering, it's always going to be built on a broken foundation, and it's never going to be sustainable. So the piece I'm writing now is essentially an exposition of that issue, and both shining a light on current examples as well as providing some examples of how to move forward and how to get past this and turn the page and get to a point where we can not only feel good about what we're making, but more importantly, how we're making it.
Great. Well, I wish you luck on those. I look forward to reading your work in the near future. And again, I want to thank you, Sidney Hopson, for joining us. And so stay safe and healthy. And I hope to see you very soon.
Hey, thank you, Alan. You too. Take care. Really appreciate you having me.
Sure. Thank you.
And have a great rest of your show.
Hello, welcome to the webcast of Moonwalk. My name is Alan Chan. Thanks for watching, and this is our fourth webcast this year since we have started that webcast series in April. And tonight is also a very special project we will talk about in just a minute. But before that, I want to make sure that you subscribe. If you have not done so, subscribe to our YouTube channel in the lower right-hand corner, as well as check out our website at AlanChanJazzOrchestra.com. Now tonight we also invited two musicians to be interviewed. We just saw Sidney Hopson and I talking about cultural policy. In a moment, Alex Budman is going to talk about our work together in a small group as well as the large ensemble. Now, Moonwalk is a very special project to me as well as to Min Xiao-Fen. We have been talking about this for almost 10 years before we realized this project in 2018. And it's only the preview of Moonwalk, and we're still working on the larger scale project. So you get to watch the full movement of Moonwalk. I met Min Xiao-Fen more than almost 20 years ago at Tonic Jazz Club in New York City. It's just fascinating to me that she not only improvises and plays jazz, pipa, but also play pipa concertos and contemporary music as well. So, and she's also going to sing for us, so it's going to be a wonderful experiment. And this webcast is also a fundraiser for the Southern Poverty Law Center, Montgomery, Alabama. This organization dedicated to fighting hate and bigotry and to seeking justice for the most vulnerable members of our society. Check out the website and donate. Anything large and small is going to make a difference. First part of the concert is going to be solo presentation of two tracks from Min Xiao-Fen's CD called Mao, Monk, and Me. She released this CD, of course, commemorating the centennial of Thelonious Monk, and it's just fascinating to see her inspiration using the Chinese instrument as well as jazz idiom. So please enjoy the first two tunes selection from the Mao, Monk, and Me album by Min Xiao-Fen on the pipa as well as Ran, another Chinese lute. Enjoy.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome,
Yeah.
Alex Budman. He is our second alto. He's a wonderful women player, one of the best in Hollywood, and it's really an honor and pleasure to welcome Alex. Hi, how are you?
As long as you think that, Alan, that's all that really matters to me. Forget everybody else.
All right. So, how are you doing?
Thank you. I'm good. I'm home a lot. Spending a lot of time with my own brain, as a lot of us are. It's certainly a different problem than many of my friends who have families and they have to deal with the homeschooling and they're kind of going their own brand of crazy, whereas I get to go crazy just right in here.
Well, kids running
you too,
around.
right? You're on your own, right?
I am too. And just been because of all these unexpected things. Now it seems like things are kind of settled and I have a little bit more time to myself. But the beginning is because I also teach, and everything went online. It kind of ran nuts because I've never taught online, and I am teaching 2 classes that I've never taught before. So I have more work to do to prepare, and everything was prepared in the paper format has to all move online. Then you spend more time with students talking on Zoom. It's just endless. But finally, I think we're back to a more quietness, and I'm starting to adjust to maybe what you have been adjusting for a while.
Maybe. But your Zoom chops are up. That's the important thing, right?
Yeah.
Forget about your composing chops. Your Zoom chops are excellent.
Yeah, well, it was a lot of fun playing with you. We did this concert. We actually did a webcast. Our first webcast was from the concert at the St. Gabriel Mission Playhouse. And we generate quite a bit of views. And I never thought it is possible that I can make all my big band shots and then just put it into a small group and it's still
very impressive.
Did it work actually?
I think it really did. It really did. No, and I mean I saw that webcast and I thought it was your music translated. I know. For those of you who haven't heard Alan's music, a lot of it is just this gorgeous, lush orchestral. And he has us playing all these different instruments, and it's just shy of 20 pieces. But then it was stripped way down, not even a guitar, and Alan holding it all down on the keyboard himself. So no, it's still
It was last year, actually. It was 2019 when we first did this, and then I did a series of other things also in jazz and other things, and so I am also writing, of course, these big projects, and I always been kind of struggling whether now in this kind of environment, I think if their opportunity comes that we will get to play live again, I would definitely be putting more of the maybe original small group works as well.
Sure.
Now, we started this Moonwalk project in 2018. I wonder if you still recall your experience working with Chinese instrumentalists, for example.
I do, and I love how you, you've had so many special guests come through, and I love how you give them each their own setting, let them do their own thing, and then incorporate them into the band. So that's always kind of a fun thing to look for each time, and there was no exception with the Moonwalk project.
Oh yeah, thank you. And it's still ongoing. I mean, I have 4 movements that's already done, and I am also finding out what Min Xiao-Fen was doing. She was not able to join us tonight. She has been busy working on her own new business right now, but she's also looking forward very much when everything opens back up, and maybe then she can start traveling again and so forth. That there are also other jam or recording sessions that involves like split screen videos and so forth.
That's true. I've been involved in really only a few since quarantine started. I have done some just basic recording at home, but I've done a couple of those projects. They can be fun to watch. Seeing how
I know that one that is called the Deep Cuts. I was very
if you can guess from the name of the band, it is an old school soul band, playing not all deep cuts. Some of them are pretty familiar, but we decided to just I think it was we play one Sunday a month at this Joe's in Burbank, Hopefully they'll be back in business. That's kind of the steady gig that band's been doing. So we purposely tried to get that thing released, and I think it was on the day we would have been. I think it was mid-April. It was like the first month we would have been playing there live in person. So that's when we released, I think, the first video. So it's a fun band. Yeah, a lot of talented. And Ben, Ben sings in there too.
Yeah. Any other things that you have been? Is our studio gigs starting to pop up again?
There are some, for various kinds of projects. I have done some recording here at home for some television that's going. I know some movie things are happening. A lot of just recorded at home and let the engineer sort it out. They seem to be doing okay. It's got to be a little tougher though, with everybody sending in. Everybody's in their own little rooms with their own microphones, and and then the engineers have to put everything in the same oral space. So I mean that's its own challenge. And then I'll even be doing a big band gig this Friday. Actually, it'll be the first time I've done something like that outside. In this, they've been doing these shows, and everybody's spaced way apart outside.
Told you previously that we were scheduled to play at the Brand Library late August, but they have canceled. So I know some places are more they're more cautious than I wouldn't say that the others are not cautious, but I went on camping with Shirley Toe and David Hughes in Sequoia National Forest a couple of weeks ago. I thought I would just need to get away, and I've never done camping before, so they said, well, they provide me a tent, and I just get my own mat and sleeping bag, and it was fun. And I discovered that David Hughes is a great cook, by the way. He's an amazing cook.
He's good at a lot of things. Yeah. Swedish bassist David Hughes, who is he has that kind of mind too. He'll get into something and get really...
Vibrato is opening up. I just got an email this morning again, and with all the protocols, but there's no live music at the moment because it's an indoor venue. So we are not sure about the August 4th concert yet, but we'll see.
The good thing about that place is that the stage is a little distanced from the crowd being up. I don't know. Maybe horn players and vocalists can just face the wall. How about that? So they don't, spit anything.
The audience is the wall,
and then the audience is the right. Put the audience facing the wall. That's a good idea. Right.
Nice sound installation. Right. Awesome. Well, I want to thank you again, Alex, for joining us. It's great talking to you. Me. Yeah, and stay safe and healthy, and we'll be in touch again.
You too. All right, fantastic. Thanks, Alan.
The first movement of Moonwalk is The West is Green. This tune is dedicated to musician and composer Fred Ho. I studied with him while I was in New York City, and I'm really inspired by his beliefs and as well as his writing, particularly from this particular book. He is a staunch believer of civil rights movement and fighting for racial equality, and he refuses all his life of calling the music that he played jazz. Instead, he called this Afro-Asian music. Please enjoy The West is Green. Now, many of you know that I've traveled to Cuba a number of times to research their music, as well as the connection with Chinese culture. This is actually the original version of Diva Cubana, written for pipa and the jazz orchestra. And you're going to see that I am doing some experiment, mixing Afro-Cuban music together with a different type of aesthetic of pipa. Now, you may hear this melody that is played together with trumpet and flute, that they are in unison, but then you hear this really interesting little detuning, and they're kind of out of sync because there is this little different aesthetics of intonation between these different instruments, the Western woodwind instruments versus the Chinese lute. So you're going to hear that. I really feel that it was something that I found that was very exciting about. Also, Min Xiao-Fen will be singing and introducing this kind of Cantonese opera melody at the beginning of this movement. You're going to hear in this second movement called Diva Cubana.
Oh
It is a lot of fun. I want to remind you that this webcast is a fundraiser for Southern Poverty Law Center based in Montgomery, Alabama. Southern Poverty Law Center is dedicated to fighting hate and bigotry and to seeking justice for the most vulnerable members of our society. Please click the link below, donate.splcenter.org, and chip in anything large and small, and it's going to make a difference. The third movement of Moonwalk is titled Diva Rumbata. Along the lines of Cuban rumba, I'm also have a little tick of a more mysterious side of the diva in this movement. There is also going to be a middle section where there will be a little bit of free jazz dialogue between the rhythm section and pipa. And that is also what is amazed me about Min Xiao-Fen, which is an improviser of this particular genre. So please enjoy Diva Rumbata. We are arriving at the last movement of Moonwalk, and it's titled Sky Veggie. This is a movement about Chang'e arrived on the moon and start planting letters so that she could turn the moon into the color green, and so her husband on Earth can see and remember her. Unfortunately, the rabbit that she accompanied with actually ate it all every time she had letters planned. So turn out that the moon is just looks like what it is now. Anyway, this is going to be a nice and lyrical movement with Min Xiao-Fen on the pipa as well as on voice, and it's titled Sky Veggie. thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the Moonwalk webcast and continue to support us by subscribing to our YouTube channel and visit our website AlanChanJazzOrchestra.com and subscribe to our newsletter as well. I hope to see you again in the fall with our new series of webcasts, and please stay safe and healthy.